What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review the new movie Arkansas, which comes out on video on demand on Tuesday, May 5th. Now, we're obviously all living through a very unusual period where there are basically no new movies coming out of any kind, but there are a few movies that are testing the waters by bypassing the theatrical experience entirely. And as somebody who's accustomed to seeing a few new movies per week, I need to make sure that I don't accidentally overpraise movies just because I'm so excited to see something new. But I do think that Arkansas is worth a look for people who enjoy unconventional, unorthodox, laid-back crime films. Arkansas is based on a book by John Brandon, with the screenplay being adapted by Clark Duke and Andrew Brucron. I'm not really that familiar with Andrew Brucron. He seems to be relatively inexperienced when it comes to making films. But Clark Duke I've obviously been seeing in comedies for over a decade now, in things like Kick-Ass or Hot Tub Time Machine. But I should add that this is his directorial debut, at least when it comes to feature films. He got to start doing this TV series called Clark and Michael, which starred him and Michael Cera, and he's done a few short films since then. But with Arkansas, it appears like he's ready to start a new stage of his career. And I don't know how much of a theatrical release this movie might have had if we weren't living in these unusual times. It was going to have its world premiere at the South by Southwest Film Festival back in March, but obviously the festival got canceled. And if this movie were enjoying a wide theatrical release, I don't know if I'd be making a really strong case that people need to leave their homes and go spend $20 to see it. But it's something to watch at home. I did find myself laughing and smiling and having a pretty good goddamn time every step of the way, because what it reminded me of quite a bit was back during the 1990s, we just got this flood of crime films. There was just something in the water at that time where the crime genre really started to flourish, whether you're talking about films like King of New York or Goodfellas or Pulp Fiction. But for every wildly successful film that I just mentioned, you also had this ocean of kind of second-tier, B-grade crime films that were still very cool. Movies like Things to Do in Denver When You're Dead. Movies that are basically forgotten now that nobody ever talks about, but had a really cool cast, fantastic dialogue, a mood and style that was totally its own. And I think that's the category that Arkansas is going to fall into, because it tackles an element of organized crime that's pretty much ignored or unexplored by movies in general, because it's dealing with the Southern Mafia. And the use of the word mafia is probably overstating the case, because as this movie describes it, the Southern Mafia is a loose affiliation of really disorganized scumbags with no real code. But stepping into this world, we have Kyle, played by Liam Hemsworth, as well as Swen, played by Clark Duke. And they're essentially well-intentioned amateurs, but it's not like one of those movies like Bottle Rocket, where they're kind of lovable and naive. This is a legit crime movie with actual real stakes. There's plenty of violence and murder and betrayals every step of the way. But what gives the film its lighthearted tone is just how disorganized a lot of these criminals are, and just how much spare time they seem to have in their schedules. There is a lovable lack of urgency to the whole proceedings. And sprinkled throughout the movie, you have this incredible ensemble cast. John Malkovich, Michael Kenneth Williams, Vivica Fox, and especially Vince Vaughn. And they all seem to be having an absolute blast playing these wildly unconventional roles. And if you look at the description of the movie on IMDb, it makes it sound like it's a lot more serious than it actually is. It says, Kyle and Swen live by the orders of an Arkansas-based drug kingpin named Frog, whom they've never met, but when a deal goes horribly wrong, the consequences are deadly. That summary is technically accurate, but it doesn't capture at all the tone of this movie. What captures the tone better than anything is this really unusual score sprinkled throughout, where they'll take well-known country songs but then perform them in a slightly humorous way with these like really deranged high-pitched voices, where you don't quite know what to make of what you're watching. And that might actually make this movie a tough sell for a lot of people, because I think a lot of people, when they watch their crime movies, they kind of want to know in advance what they're getting into. Does this movie have stakes? Are we watching a lighthearted romp? But what makes this movie kind of fun and unpredictable is how quickly and frequently it shifts between these different tones, where a really brutal, horrific torture scene involving a hammer and a coat hanger going into someone's ear can suddenly become unintentionally hysterical, because the reality is most of the criminals in this movie aren't particularly good at what they do. But there's a great quote at the beginning of the movie that sums up the flavor of the film, and it's from Charles Portis, the guy who wrote True Grit, where it says, "A lot of people leave Arkansas, and most of them come back sooner or later. They can't quite achieve escape velocity." And I feel like that sums up a lot of the characters in this movie, where they don't really have any ambitions beyond this state. They're just looking to make a few extra bucks on the side. None of these characters seem to know each other that well, and they really don't seem to be that loyal to each other. When it comes to whether or not these characters may or may not double-cross each other, the question is not if, it's just a matter of when. And one of the biggest strengths this movie has to offer is probably its structure, which I assume comes from the book because it's quite literally broken up into different chapters along the way. And probably the best chapters of this movie are those featuring Vince Vaughn as a young man, Frog, as he slowly but surely climbs through the ranks of Southern drug dealers. And admittedly, this corporate ladder, it doesn't take that long to get to the upper echelons. But Vince Vaughn turns in one of his most interesting performances in recent memory, where he actually does have a bit of a code, and he eventually takes these two dumbass twins under his wing, but he's realistic about how long this relationship might last because he betrayed his mentor, and he assumes rightly that it's only a matter of time before his apprentices will inevitably try to betray him as well. But what's hysterical about the movie is how Kyle and Swin accidentally kind of stumble blindly into becoming the biggest enemies that Vince Vaughn's characters ever faced. And it's not even something that they do deliberately. They've never met Frog. They don't know who Frog is. And through a series of circumstances that are totally beyond their control, where they're just trying to improvise and do the best job they can under the circumstances, they accidentally create the appearance that they're trying to take over the Southern Mafia when nothing could be further from the truth. And while I'm not necessarily ready to declare Clark Duke and Liam Hemsworth the next great action comedy duo, I think they enjoy a decent level of chemistry. And Liam Hemsworth was surprisingly charismatic in the lead role. Obviously, his brother Chris Hemsworth casts a very, very long shadow. People love him, adore him as Thor, and Extraction is rapidly becoming one of the biggest movies of the summer. And this movie in no way, shape, or form is in any position to outshine the viral phenomenon of Extraction over on Netflix. But the movie has forced me to look at Liam Hemsworth in a different light. He does a pretty good job doing a laid-back Southern accent. Obviously, he's Australian, but he's figured out that when it comes to doing a Southern accent, all you have to do is just kind of slow things down and stretch out your vowels, and you start sounding pretty Southern. But what surprised me most about this movie was that Liam Hemsworth is actually pretty damn funny. Also, the director, Clark Duke, he's from Arkansas, so he seems to be doing his best to inject this film with some genuine Arkansas authenticity. And I realized that I've gotten pretty deep into my review without really calling attention to anything negative. Perhaps I've got a soft spot for movies with horrific violence and some lighthearted humor. But if I wanted to call attention to one of the film's main weaknesses, it might be that because the film is so laid back and so decompressed, that some people might wonder why they're watching it because the stakes of the film feel so low at times. But the people who like this movie are going to say that's part of its charm, so pick your poison. In any case, film history has plenty of examples where a young filmmaker comes along, makes a low-budget movie, and it has such a massive impact that it prompts an entire generation of people to drop out of school and rack up a bunch of debt making their first feature. This is not going to be one of those movies. But I think every single person involved in this movie can be justifiably proud of the final product. Never in a million years did I expect that Clark Duke was going to evolve into a filmmaker of low-budget crime films, but whatever his next film as a director might be, I'll definitely check it out. He has got my attention. So I'm not trying to insult the movie or offer a backhanded compliment by claiming that the movie is only worth watching because we're living through a time period where there's so few new movies coming our way. But if in the past you found yourself enjoying unconventional crime films with kind of an unusual, esoteric, lighthearted tone, I think you might be surprised by what Arkansas has to offer. So that's all I got to say about this particular movie. Hopefully this period of no movies will be drawn to a close soon. It seems like by July, things like Christopher Nolan's Tenet will be coming our way. That seems to be the tentative plan right now. So it appears as if perhaps maybe in 6 or 7 weeks, we'll start having a lot more options to choose from when it comes to movies. But if right now you're desperate for a new movie-going experience, check out the trailer. At a bare minimum, I think Arkansas is worth a shot. But that's all I got to say about this particular movie. So if you want to talk more about crime films or Arkansas or whatever, you can always find me on Twitter at Colbrax. And if you enjoyed this review, please consider subscribing to the channel, liking the video, hitting that notification bell. I would really appreciate it. But thanks again for watching my rant. I appreciate it. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.